Right, in this video, I'm going to take the role of non-techie and Andy is going to take on the role of techie. And we're going to walk you through a new way of thinking about and approaching challenges in your back office. And it's really targeted at startups, so businesses that are just getting going as a D2C brand, who are looking for a way of making their back office more efficient and ultimately more scalable. And what we're going to do is we're going to share some no-code tools that you can use and you can get for very little cost. Start experimenting and using inside of your business immediately. And these tools will enable you to make your back office more efficient and more scalable without the need of buying an off the shelf technology. So typically businesses will look for a back office tool like an order management system, an inventory management system, and in some cases they jump straight into an ERP system. This is a totally different approach that we think is going to change the way D2C businesses scale. And in the future, very few businesses will jump straight into having a complex back office tool like an ERP. And instead, they will use a combination of platforms like Shopify, which we're going to show you, and then no code tools to just elongate that phase where they can, in a scrappy way, continue to grow the business before really committing to anything long term. So Andy, over to you. Let's kick off with explaining the tools that you're going to show us.
Sure. Okay. So, as Luke mentioned earlier this week, he asked me about which tools we've seen used before for essentially a scale up startup product management. And one of the easiest setups that I've seen before are a combination of three tools. Those would be Shopify on the front end for the e-commerce system. So Shopify, number one hosted e-commerce system, very scalable, can handle loads of traffic, really easy to use. Next up was for product management, it would be Airtable. So Airtable is like a spreadsheet on steroids. So it looks like a spreadsheet to start with. It's got loads of different fields that you can enhance with functions or different column types, images in there, loads of cool stuff. So that's where we're going to manage our products. And then we need a way of connecting the two because the two systems don't natively talk to each other. For that, we're going to use a system which was previously known as Integromat, which is now called Make.com. And what Make.com is going to do, it's going to give us a drag and drop interface and a really easy way of mapping fields between the different systems. And that's going to take the data that we store and edit in Airtable and push it into the Shopify system.
Nice. And you mentioned there that they're really intuitive and easy to use. Make and Airtable are both part of this no code movement or no code revolution. What does no code mean to your average sort of D2C founder or operator?
Less headaches,
Right.
I think. What it should be is effectively what it says. So it shouldn't require any code whatsoever. It should be a drag and drop interface, selectable options that allow you to easily configure a system without any technical knowledge.
Yeah. Okay. And as a non-techie, for anyone watching this video, I can't code. Andy's background is as an engineer. So we come into using these tools at different levels of technical knowledge. I've found that no code tools like Integromat, so Make and Airtable, if you've got context knowledge, you understand the processes that need to be accommodated through using different tooling, these systems will enable you to build minimum viable products without needing to even work with anybody technical. You can actually get something working on your own, and you can use really great documentation that most of these products ship with, and they're constantly evolving. And no code has gotten really, really popular, not least because the tooling is amazing, but also the community of people that wrap around it are really, really proactive at sharing what they know. So you can go on YouTube and find like tutorials. And I suppose this is part of it, right? Like we're sharing this video because we want other people to be discovering how to deploy and utilize these tools inside of a D2C environment. So yeah, for any like non-techies out there that is usually feeling a bit insecure about getting their hands on to tools, particularly when we're talking about like potentially quite complex processes in the back office, that's what this is all about. It's about trying to break down that kind of intellectual or mental barrier and just get your hands on a tool. So, or on a combination of tools. So when Andy, also you were mentioning about this is for products, I think it's worth stressing to anybody watching it, like that is just one use case. We're using that as an example to demonstrate how you can thread these different systems together and how you can utilize them in a commercial context. Are there other examples of where you've used this scene or use this combination of tools for different processes or different parts of managing an e-commerce business, Andy?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Airtable can act as a simple database or simple interface for administrators in the business. So things like order management can be done in Airtable. Even moving further down the line, purchase order management, inventory management,
Mm-hmm.
it can all be done in the same three systems as I mentioned before. As to whether they're the question then becomes, are they the best tools for those? And sometimes what we see is order management or inventory management can sometimes be moved out to like a warehouse management system or a 3PL partner.
Right.
And in that case, tools like make.com can still be used. You would just have a different configuration for maybe the order flow that
Yeah.
pushes the data to the warehouse instead of into Airtable.
Got you.
Okay, so just quick run through the systems as I mentioned before. So Shopify, we have Airtable, which is going to be our effectively our spreadsheet or database for product management. And then we have Integromat, which is our no-code integration platform, which has rebranded, you may see this, to make.com. I've got some demo accounts set up as well. So just quickly, this is the Shopify administration area, just our demo store. Nothing in here but a couple of products. We'll see those in a minute. We've got make.com, which effectively here I've got one scenario set up, and this is our Airtable integration. And finally, we've got our product catalog, which is in Airtable. We've simply got products with images, prices, and a few other attributes. This is actually a base Airtable document. So in Airtable, they have lots of different templates and bases that you can use. And just for the ease of this demo, I chose the product catalog, which came with all these products in there. Effectively, the only thing that I needed to do to have this integration ready was add the three fields at the end here, which are created at last modified and Shopify ID. And that's just so that make.com knows when you've edited a record so that it can push it to Shopify. And the Shopify ID field is there just so it can decide whether to do a create or an update, if that makes sense.
And the Shopify ID in this example, then, have you keyed in the Shopify ID, or is that pulled
No,
back from Shopify?
no, that's pulled back from Shopify. And actually, if we jump back to make.com here and just have a look at this flow that we've got set up, effectively starting on the left, our source is Airtable. It then goes into a router, And the reason it goes into a router is because with with our products in our spreadsheet, we need to decide if we're doing a create in Shopify or an update in Shopify.
Mm,
Now, obviously, if you were doing creates every time you edited a product, it would add a new record in Shopify, which
mm,
is not desirable. But what we've got here is a simple filter that says if the Shopify ID doesn't exist, then it must be a create. And if the Shopify ID exists, then it must be an update.
cool.
And it uses that ID to know which record to update.
And in the same breath, it's pulling that ID back when a product is created so that
Exactly.
Airtable has a record of it as well.
Exactly. So you can see this fourth step in the create chain here is a pushback to Airtable,
Mm,
and that will actually update the record in Airtable with the ID of the result from Shopify.
mm, mm.
So
Okay,
it's
cool.
doing that automatically. Basically, in Shopify, in Airtable here, if we were to uh, make a real quick update, we should see the last modified timestamp is changed.
Yeah.
And then just as a real quick example, I'm just going to hit run once in Make, and we can see it picked a couple of records up there. I think we've done a couple of edits in the last 15 minutes. Um, and those records have gone through the router. They haven't got IDs, so they've gone to the create product function. They've created, and then they've been pushed back to Airtable. So first of all, if we hop over to Shopify, give that a refresh. Three new products in there, which is great. If we jump back into Airtable, we can see there are another three records with Shopify IDs.
Lots of businesses will do when they're first starting out is manage their product data directly into Shopify so they don't have it external. And then
Yeah,
they'll very quickly get to a point where they realize that the same product data is required in lots of different places, at least inside of a fulfillment center, both in the website, maybe in other channels, so like other sales channels. And very quickly they realized that actually having their product data managed in Shopify is, let's use an Americanism, suboptimal, and actually it would be much better to do it external. And I think what we'd always encourage businesses to do is actually follow this as a bit of a template from day one and use a product catalog in Airtable as this like central repository and the source for any eventual endpoints. And in the same way as Andy has added these Shopify specific columns in Airtable, or fields as they're called in Airtable, you can very easily add additional columns in the future for other channels or other endpoints that receive the data. And I think what this is essentially replacing is either just putting and keying your product data into Shopify until you realize you need it in other places. And then you have to retrofit this way anyway. So doing it right from day one. And then in the second is really replacing these like centrally managed Excel spreadsheets that usually live on one person's laptop. And only they really understand the different fields that exist in it. And ultimately, the business is dependent upon that one person to then make sure that that data makes its way into the various systems and over to different third parties. And look, Airtable and Make don't integrate to absolutely everything, but what that demo shows you is that there's a clear logic and then also feedback going into the Airtable to give you sort of an ability to validate whether things have reached the destination properly or not.
One of the simplest use cases that I've seen in the past. I mean, we're using Airtable there effectively as a super simple PIM, so product information management system. And one of the examples that I've seen in the past is when you have multiple Shopify sites. So if you're a fast scaling D2C brand, you might launch with three or four different Shopify front ends in different geographic locations, different languages. And Suddenly you have 4 Shopify front ends and you need to manage your products in 4 different Shopify back ends. What this approach would give you is effectively one place to manage products, and then you could use Integromat to push that single source of products out to 4 different Shopify front end systems.
Well, look, and as with all of these videos, they can be expanded upon. So if people watching this have got specific challenges that they're trying to square up to, or are actually already experimenting and innovating in these tools, like, comment below, let us know what things you are exploring and what challenges you're trying to solve. And we can kind of start a dialogue and create another video that goes more specific or goes deeper in a particular area. I think, as I mentioned before, it's probably worth calling out some of the known limitations. So once you start getting your hands into these systems and you get your head around and your mindset around how they work, and a lot of that is about like understanding how databases relate to one another. And if you've got an engineering background, you're probably going to have that baked into you anyway. But for those non-techies like me, it's about just like that conceptual shift. And once you start to grasp that, you'll probably start to think, wow, this is hugely powerful and I could do all kinds of different stuff. Nobody is there to stop you. The whole point of no code is that you can experiment and you can explore different ideas. Just be mindful that Airtable, for example, has limits to the number of records or rows, I think they refer to it as, which, if you are working in a even just a moderately high volume D2C business in terms of sales or product data or both, and you start to bake your operations into Airtable, you will find that you get to a point where you reach the upper limit of how many records you can or rows you can have saved in a single Airtable base. That presents a big problem in that you're then going to have to fork your databases. So you're basically going to have a legacy set of data and then start from zero again. So you can clone the base with all of the functions and all of the logic and all of the fields, but you're then starting with an empty database again. That's a real problem if you have things like customer records that you want to make sure you're keeping a track of how many orders have gone to a particular customer. So what typically happens is a business will reach a certain limit of rows, and I think it's 250,000 rows. It's a big number, but when you think about the number of orders and the number of different fields that you might be having in an Airtable, surprising how quickly you start to reach that limit. So what businesses will tend to do is they'll build an MVP. They'll try and limit the number of different things they rely on Airtable to be the master of. And then as they're approaching those limits, they will migrate to something that is more off the shelf and purpose built. So that will typically happen at an inflection point of, say, 2, 3, 4, £5 million turnover. But for a lot of brands, that gives you a decent runway to be able to use the systems effectively. The other area of limitation, and again, there'll be some debate around this, but if you do really high volumes of sales, and let's say, for example, you use an Airtable, Make, and Shopify combo to manage orders and inventory going between your website and like your inventory levels. If Shopify's source of inventory is Airtable, and also Airtable receives the orders before then distributing them elsewhere, there is a question mark that around the throughput and the volume that you can put through these different systems and them keep up. So if you do things like big Black Friday sales or flash sales, or you have just like unexpected spikes over the year in sales, and you're also seeing those sales spike across lots of like multiple Shopify storefronts, that presents a really big problem when you're using these tools, because they may just not keep up, which ultimately results in you overselling on your website. That again also is relevant if you have 2 or 3 different Shopify stores pooling the same inventory level, and you have small or low volumes of inventory that's shared across those different sites. Because when you do that, if you have a sale on your UK Shopify store, what you want is for it to instantly deduct the stock in the other areas. Now, if an external endpoint is the source of inventory to those different Shopify front ends, you need that. Like, it needs to be really low latency. It has to be almost instant. And, Make and Airtable are brilliant, really flexible, but they do have some latency. You do have to wait for the processes to run and complete. So just some known limitations. So latency, throughput, and then data limit, like volume limits. Those are the big gotchas that you want to be aware of before you build your entire back office inside of these systems. Right. That is video numero uno done. Obviously, comment below and get in touch with us if you want to learn more, explore specific challenges that you've got, and ultimately jump into the comment section. Let's start a dialogue with other people inside of the e-commerce thinking community. And thanks for watching. Cheers, Andy.
Thanks.